So in this video, we're going to break down how a bill becomes a law and then look at some more parts of Congress and how they work because we're going to be transitioning into the executive branch next. So how a bill becomes a law. First, the bill is presented by an interest group or an individual to a congressperson. And depending on what type of bill you have, if it has to do with revenue or spending or what are called appropriations, which means that it says in the Constitution if the money has to be appropriated or cut, which means cut out or money is spent from the Treasury, then it has to go to the House of Representatives. If it is not a spending bill, like say it's an ethics issue, say I don't know, somebody in Congress did something wrong, you want to impeach the president or something, that bill could start in the Senate, for example. But if you want to impeach, you'd actually have to start in the House of Reps. But anything that doesn't have to actually do with spending could start in the Senate. So you'll see why the House of Reps is actually much more powerful in a lot of ways than the Senate. But the Senate does have some other powers we've talked about. Okay, and the reason interest groups will hire what are called lobbyists. A lobbyist is a certified attorney. It's a lawyer that basically has a legal certification to actually meet with Congress, and they understand the rules of how you can give and treat congressmen and women without actually getting in a situation where you're breaking any ethical rules, like where it seems like they're spending money or sliding money underneath the table. So, if you want to send a bill to Congress, what I would suggest is usually start with your House of Representatives or your representative. So, if you live in District 1 in St. Louis, you've got Cori Bush. So, that'd be St. Louis City and North County, Northwest County, and certain parts of Central County, like University City and so forth. And if you're a District 2, you want to talk to Ann Wagner. So, that would be like a lot of Mid County, South County, and parts of St. Charles and Jefferson County. So, you'd go to them. You could actually try to meet with them and then ask them to sponsor your bill, or you could pay a lobbyist to approach them, and might be a little bit more received, and depending on what you need. Or you could go through work with a group of people to put pressure on them. Or the other way, you could go to your senators. If it doesn't have to do with revenue, you could try to talk to Josh Hawley, one of our Missouri senators, and meet with him and try to pass the bill that way. Committees. So a congressperson introduces the bill. Okay, it's got to be from a senator or a representative. Most bills are started in the representatives, House of Representatives, because most bills actually have to do with appropriations and they cost money that we have to take out of the Treasury. Now it goes to a committee before anything else. So once the congressman or woman has said, okay, I'll sponsor your bill, they'll take it to the right committee or they'll give it to somebody who's in the right committee. Now you have to start in the correct committee. So a committee is a small chosen group of congressional people that is responsible for specific duties. So you have the Intelligence Committee, the Ethics Committee, Education Committee, Workforce Committee, Budget Committee, Appropriations Committee. And we'll talk about the most powerful is the Ways and Means. Anything that really starts with any kind of spending really starts at Ways and Means, and then it can go to appropriations or budget or other areas, depending on what. And this committee will debate and they'll look at the bill and then it'll move on to the floor. And this has to be sponsored bill by a senator or a representative. Okay? So now you can also have what's called a conference committee, and this is a committee where Congress has appointed a rep, somebody from the House of Reps and the Senate, and they actually meet together to resolve any differences on a bill. These are really important because, according to the Constitution, a bill has to be exactly the same, word for word, verbatim. Okay, exactly the same. It has when it passes both houses before it could go to the president, and the president can actually sign it into law. So if there's an issue or there's one word or idea and you might be, oh, well, it's just a typo or just something silly, you can't have these typos or something silly in a bill before it becomes law, because the and then or there and a and is and on, any kind of small modifications or changes within the way something is said can change the entire meaning of the bill. So that's why language is so important, and lawyers know this. And most people in Congress, in the House of Reps and the Senate, are attorneys. So they know the power of language. And you guys are learning this in writing classes in government and history. We know how powerful language is to mislead people. We know that's why they call these things like the Patriot Act. Like they'll make an acronym so that the law sounds really patriotic or it's really positive and it stands for something else. And they do that on purpose, but you got to really watch the language. So the House sends the bill. Let's say the House sends the bill to the Senate, and the Senate says, "This is not exactly what we want." They use a conference committee to work out and make sure the language is exactly the same, but it still has to be voted on by the House and the Senate before it goes to the president. Now, when a bill is coming up, or there's any other issues or any questions, they can actually subpoena people. Congress can use what's called a subpoena, and I know you guys, if you watch like a late night detective show or something, they give somebody a subpoena. And a subpoena is a court order, and Congress can do this where they forces a person to testify and provide evidence on how they are addressing the problem or testify under oath. So they can actually subpoena somebody to speak on a bill, but also they could subpoena people to speak on discipline. Let's say the bill itself is not about money. Say it's about an ethical issue, or for example, it was about the impeachment. It was and they're voting on whether they're going to impeach the president. That could become it wouldn't necessarily become a law, but it would be a bill to impeach. And they can call generals in the military. They can call me or you. They can call pretty much anybody to the House of Representatives, or this in this case for impeachment, and they can question them. And I'm sure you guys have seen committee questions where, like, the ethics committee gets up there and they have a million questions, and they've done everything for like Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos, like these big tech and huge companies, and ask them questions like about how do they conduct things to make sure it's ethical or it's not breaking monopoly laws. So, all right. Now, this is a really lively graph. It's really good at showing you the whole process of how a bill becomes a law. You're not going to have to remember all this, but remember, the bill starts, it's introduced legislation to, it's got to be introduced by a senator or a representative. It goes to committee, they mark it up, they fix it, they change it, they argue, they debate it. Then they vote whether or not it's even going to go to the floor. And most bills never leave committee. The vast majority of bills never even get on the floor of the House of Representatives or the Senate to even be voted on. Then when it does get actually put on the calendar, and that's very important, because the person that puts it on the calendar is a pretty important, powerful person, which would be the Speaker of the House, or Nancy Pelosi, or in this case, you get the Senate, and you have the President pro tempore, or the leader of the Senate, and Mitch McConnell, gets to decide whether or not they're actually going to argue or debate this bill. And you're like, well, it's just what's the big deal if you put it on a calendar? It's a very big deal, because they could put it right before a break where it drags the bill out and people just want to go home. They could time it to put it on the floor later than people want to get done, or they could push back something, or they could even refuse to some degree to drag this thing so it doesn't even get debated. So they have a lot of power, actually. So that's why Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi are pretty powerful people. And then you debate it on the floor, and the debates and how long you debate it in the House of Representatives is set by the Rules Committee. And then we're going to find out in the Senate, they actually have what are called, you could filibuster, but there's still rules about how long they're trying to debate it, but they could do what's called a filibuster, where they could drag the bill out and try to talk it to death. And I'm not going to go over all these other parts, but then it could, if there's any changes or the Senate is not happy with the bill, they have to send it back to the House of Representatives and make sure the bill is exactly the same for both houses before it's approved. Or they could do what's called a conference committee we talked about. That's quicker to just make it sure it's word for word, and then they can both vote almost one after another. And then it goes all the way up to the President of the United States after the Senate debates it, or the House, depending on which way it started. And then it goes to the president. He signs it into law and becomes a law. And that's it. The only reason things become unconstitutional, and I know some people have been confused on this, is somebody has to challenge the law and say it's unconstitutional or it's wrong before the Supreme Court will even take it up. So no, you cannot send a law directly to the Supreme Court. It has to go through a court process that we'll get into later on. Okay, and then you have what are called pet projects, and these are projects that they call pork barrel projects. And pork in politics is when, like, congressmen or women, they slap things on there that really just help their district. Like, they negotiate spending on things that maybe don't help the whole country. It might just help their area. Probably the most famous example of pork barrel politics would be like the Bridge to Nowhere. And this is not a joke. There's really this like very expensive multi-million-dollar bridge that was designed and built in Alaska, and it connects like I think like an island to the mainland or something. And basically nobody ever uses this bridge. But the congressmen at the time who threw this pork in there had the U.S. taxpayers pay millions of dollars to build this expensive bridge because it got jobs in his community, but nobody actually uses the bridge, so it's just kind of a waste of money. We also talked. These are called like earmark provisions, which are legislation that appropriate money, again, spend federal money on specific projects. So we talked about so pork. So things like you can also use bills and your power, and that's why when a congressman or woman or senator that has more tenure, which means they've been in office longer, they have a lot more pull. Like actually, one of the consequences of Cori Bush being the new representative, she's like this freshman, she's this new congresswoman, and she's actually doesn't have much power at all because of that. Where Lacey Clay had been there for 20 some odd years, so he had a lot of pull to get things like the geospace headquarters built downtown in St. Louis, which is his district. Or he's a lot of times people would credit him with being responsible for building that like that beautiful federal archives building where they keep records building, and it's right off 255 North, almost in Hazelwood. So he's kind of he had some power, and he got a lot of things built in that district, and he probably pushed on the legislation to get it to come his way to his district. Now, there are a few groups that monitor earmarks in the U.S. Congress, but earmarks are no longer allowed in the House. So, earmarks are going away. It's gotten a lot better, but there's still this idea that congressmen and senators and women from their area, they push to get things built in their communities. And one great example of this would be like you look at how powerful Boeing is. Boeing's in many districts across the United States, and they build fighter jets and planes, and they use their lobbying and their power through these districts to get these congressmen and women to always get tax cuts or protect or try to get some kind of financial support to Boeing to keep them in their district, or they put things in there that help companies in their region. So there's still this bias that the Senate and the congressmen and women have. So here's some examples of bills. House, there's the committees: Agriculture, Appropriations, Armed Services. The Senate has finances. Foreign relations is very important because the Senate is the ones that actually deal with treaties and trades. So, okay, the Ways and Means Committee, we've said, is the most powerful because it can control tax and trade legislation. Very important. If there's going to be any kind of taxes, what's probably the biggest debate amongst Democrats or Republicans in the parties is who gets taxed, who pays less taxes. If you want any of that stuff or anything that has to do with trade or commerce or spending is going to start in the House on Ways and Means. So it's a big deal. You're one of the most powerful. And also, who gets committee assignments is it's set up by the Speaker of the House or Mitch McConnell, which is the President pro tempore, who's in charge of the Senate. They get to set up committee assignments, and it's based on tenure and power. So if they know that the Republican senator from Colorado has been a senator for 30 years, he's probably going to get pretty decent committees, and if he's loyal to the party. Now, if he's not loyal to the party, Mitch McConnell, the Republican, could say, "Oh, I'm not going to put this guy on a committee anymore." And maybe people that are really loyal or they're the real strong Republican or Democrats that have been in the Senate or House for a long time, they tend to get really good committee assignments. And that's really important because remember, the bills have to start in committee. So if you're anybody that's passionate about science and the environment, like getting money to research in America, you'd probably want to be on the science committee. Now, obviously, just to be clear, there's between a standing committee, you have standing committees. Standing committees mean that they're literally standing, like they're always there. We always have a science committee. We have the rules committee is always there. Judiciary committee, which has to do with law, judges, picking federal judges. They're always there. They always exist. They meet and they constantly go. Where we have temporary committees that are created maybe for like an investigation, like an impeachment investigation committee or something like that's temporary, and then that committee will dissolve after that. So, but you can see a list of the standing committees to my right. The majority party controls all the committees in that house. So right now in the House of Representatives, it's the Democrats, and Nancy Pelosi gets to basically set up committee assignments. So you don't want to mess with her. If you're the Democrat, you probably don't want to mess with her. But also, they have to allow Republicans, the minority, on the committees. But the breakdown will always be like there's one more Democrat kind of thing. So there'll generally be like 5 Democrats on the Ways and Means Committee and 4 Republicans. So as long as the Democrats stay together, they'll get whatever they want passed, and vice versa. In the Senate, it's the Republicans as of now, and that may change. We'll see. All right. Now, along the lines of a bill and making laws, that's one way you could really change things in America. And probably the biggest change you could do in America and changing expectations for the country is you could actually amend the Constitution. And we're looking at a couple quick ways to amend the Constitution. There's actually more than one way to amend the Constitution. I think a lot of people are not clear on that. First of all, the most popular way is you have 2/3 of the House of both houses of Congress and the Senate. So you got the House of Reps and the Senate, 2/3. So 66 senators. I'm sorry, 67 yes, 67 senators have to vote to amend the Constitution out of 100, and then 2/3 of 435. I can't remember. It's like 300 and something. Representatives have to vote to actually amend the Constitution, and then that they can actually amend the Constitution, and that's the number one way. It's the most common way that we've amended the Constitution. Is this the Senate and the House have just 2/3 of them have voted to actually amend, which or change or add a change in writing to the Constitution of the United States. Other ways is 2/3 of the state legislators ask Congress to call a national convention to propose an amendment. That does not happen. Like the state's legislators, 2/3 of them, so would have to get together and want a convention, and they could do it that way. Another way is 3/4 of the state legislators approve it. That has been used. It's rare but people are like, well, why isn't the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution, which would be the 28th Amendment, which would give women equal rights in America in writing, in clear writing? Why hasn't that been passed? And it's been out there for over 20 some odd years, 30 years almost. No, I'm sorry, over 30 years. It's just been sitting there. Well, 3/4 of the state's legislators have not approved it. They have not ratified it. I'm sorry. And then so 3/4 of the states legislators have to approve it. And I think it only needs one more state. So there still is not 3 out of 4 states in America have approved the ERA. It just kind of blows your mind. And then you have ratifying a convention, which would be 3/4 of the states approve it if you have a convention. So you'd have to have another convention. So the convention has not been used. However, the votes, like pass it to state, and the most common way was actually just having Congress do it. It's a lot easier that way. There's some interesting facts on the right. You want to think about Congress may limit the time in which a proposed amendment must be ratified. So that's a good question about the Equal Rights Amendment. Has it timed out? And I think the consensus is the agreement is kind of no, not yet. How long can a amendment be out there before it goes dead? Well, I just said the ERA has been out there for over 30 some odd years. Arguably, it's still going. So amendments can take years to change the Constitution.